Pieces of me. Authentic, belonging, powerful opportunities, lasting change.
Thank you so much for attending to our celebration event. We're very excited to speak with you about Pieces of Me, as well as some of our goals of what we're trying to work on as an organization, and also introduce all of you to who we are as a team. I would like to introduce Christy Rogers, my esteemed colleague, and also one of our leaders here at Pieces of Me. Christy graduated from Arizona State University with a bachelor's degree in criminology and criminal justice, and graduated from University of Phoenix with a master's degree in administration of justice and security. She has worked for nearly 10 years in the behavioral health field, and she's worked with helping people with serious mental health illnesses, crisis intervention, suicide prevention, and daily welfare checks. She did become injured in an accident that left her disabled with spine injuries, which ended up becoming one of the catalysts for her joining forces with Daniel Hodges to make Pieces of Me a reality. Another thing is also that Christy's youngest daughter of 4 children was born with a limb difference, which is why she is extremely passionate about helping people with disabilities and making a difference. And Christy's going to be speaking with us and just doing some introductory remarks for the group, and I'll pass it on to her now.
Good evening, everyone. Hi, and welcome. Again, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to support us and learn more about our organization. Like Kush said, my name is Christy Rogers. I'm the Vice President and co-founder of Pieces of Me. There are many reasons why I want to be a part of creating an organization for people who have disabilities. As she mentioned, I myself have an invisible disability, which comes with a lot, as some of you can relate to. Again, I have my daughter who was born with a limb difference, and that also comes with its own set of challenges. I have experienced firsthand the lack of access to resources and support, as well as society's perception and judgment of individuals with disabilities. After discussing with my cousin Dan the possibility of starting a nonprofit, I realized it was the perfect opportunity to be able to create the change I wanted to see. 4 years later, we are continuing to build and grow as a team every day. And I think that our team is truly miraculous. And I'm excited for everyone to get to learn more tonight about what we have done and what we plan to do. So, thank you once again for joining us. And I really hope that you enjoy the presentation this evening.
Thank you so much, Christy. And I really couldn't agree with you more in regards to our team just being such a blessing and how far we've come as a team and as an organization. Next, I'd like to invite to the stage Karen Schulz, who's also one of our board members and our board of directors. And she will be speaking to Pieces of Me then and now, and speaking to a little bit of where we started and where we have come since that time.
Thank you, Kush. As she said, I'm Karen Schulz. How we started, let me give a little background for myself. I am the director of the Disability Access Services Office at the University of Baltimore, and I work with students such as Daniel to provide accommodations to make sure there's access to the campus in every shape or form. And when he was in law school, we had many afternoons we would just sit back and talk about life, literally. And then as I started to contemplate retirement and my next steps, I was thinking, what can I do to start giving back to the community? And we were talking about difficulties with access, difficulties with transitioning and changes, particularly for people with disabilities. And even though my expertise is in higher ed, accommodations, knowing, because I taught special ed as well, I kind of know the gamut. And knowing the struggles that I saw parents go through and trying to find supports in the community, as well as what our students are experiencing, he mentioned to me, hey, are you interested? My cousin and I have been talking about starting this nonprofit organization. I'm like, yeah, maybe. 4 years later, here I am. And what I can safely say or confidently say is where we were and where we are now, coincidentally, we've kind of come full circle to where we first started talking about the purpose and the mission behind the organization. We are here to serve as references, resources, supports. We are here to answer questions because there's a lot of stuff out there people don't know, and there's a lot of stuff that's hidden, defined in support of people. So where we started was kind of becoming this repository of information, and we decided, you know what, we really do a good job with that, and we're going to come back to that. So here we are, as I said, 4 years later, and we are starting to build momentum and starting to build followers, and hopefully we can take the next steps to take into bigger and better things. I really appreciate each of you taking your time tonight to be here with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. Not sure, is James on the call? I'd like to invite James. Hi, James. I would like to introduce James, also from our board, to speak next, and I'll let him do an introduction of himself. But James is also on our board. He holds the position of secretary, and he's going to be speaking to our new vision statement at Pieces of Me Foundation.
Well, hi, my name is Jim Troutwine, and I am a technophobe. So let me introduce myself first in that fashion, because I got to tell you, I'm having trouble with my Zoom meeting on my laptop, which is why I'm on my cell phone. So in speaking to a little bit about myself, I am a paralegal, a law clerk by trade. I got to know Dan Hodges, our president and co-founder, along with, of course, Christy. And I got to know Dan in law school. Dan is truly an inspiration. And it was because of what Dan has been through and everything that he's overcome and shown how to overcome. And not only overcome, but overcome with a style and grace that I think is just amazing of anybody within or outside of the disability community. We were actually talking not too long ago about the Pieces of Me Foundation and the vision statement, which we have finally concluded. And I am looking now to pull that up to discuss that. So my apologies that it is not coming up. Again, this is not my usual laptop. So let me just basically say in general, without the statement in front of me, that we have worked on this for quite some time, that I think that it was the collaboration of a lot of thoughtful minds and a lot of different perspectives. I think that it is indicative of our inclusiveness. It is the, I think, embodiment of Dan's approach of calling people in rather than calling them out, a phrase that I absolutely love. And it's also an approach that deals not only with just advocating for the disability community, but advocating for the community as a whole, to include the disability community for everyone's benefit. So that's kind of what I can tell you. Certainly I could get into great detail about what each and every word has meant, because again, we have gone over this quite a bit. But I believe that this is the statement that encapsulates our vision and sets us apart from other organizations that are merely advocacy or merely educational or otherwise. I think this is a group that honestly does it all. and hopefully we'll do it well. Thank you.
Thank you, James. That's so important to note. I really appreciate, the calling people in versus calling people out. I think that's a very important distinction that we make as an organization, and really creating safe spaces where everyone can feel welcome to learn and grow and experience this world with each other. I would actually like to next invite Fred Brown, Professor Fred Brown, who is also on our board, and he will be speaking to being an ally on the board.
Thank you so much, Khushbu. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
So yeah, as Khushbu mentions, my name is Fred Brown. So I'm a law professor at the University of Baltimore School of Law, and I specialize in areas unrelated to disability law. I specialize in federal income tax and business law. And you probably noticed a common theme here. So I'm at University of Baltimore School of Law. Dan was a student there. So was Jim. And it's through UB Law that I met both Dan and Jim, and basically Dan, it's through him that I became part of this organization. And so let me just give you some more background about myself. So I don't have any disabilities, physical differences, or chronic illness. Yet I really strongly believe in the mission and vision of Pieces of Me. And I think really in a broad sense, Pieces is about fostering equality and fairness, which all individuals clearly deserve. And in my opinion, it's the responsibility of all of us, those with and without physical disabilities, differences, and chronic illness, to work together to end the stigma that's often associated with physical characteristics that are outside of the perceived norm. So as I mentioned, I don't have any real direct experience in this particular space, but I feel strongly about the mission and the vision, and I do what I can to try to assist the organization. So I do have quite a bit of experience working for or serving on a nonprofit board. Just through my job and my legal training, I'm involved a lot with just administering things. So I do think I have things that I can contribute. And I try my best to use my skills to advance the vital work of Pieces. And let me just say also too, that I think I've gained as much from this as hopefully the organization has from some of my contributions. I mean, in that I'm incredibly inspired by my fellow board members and advisors on Pieces, and it's just something that really I carry with this form of inspiration to try to make the world a better place in this particular space. So thanks for attending, and I look forward to hearing from others.
Thank you, Fred. And I wanted to say you too are an invaluable member of this team, and I really appreciate having you here as well.
Thank you, Kush. Same to you.
Next, I'd like to invite Deborah Wick to the stage, and she is going to be speaking to making the business case for accessibility. Accessibility is something that is a very important topic to this organization, and something that we really want to make sure is spoken about and learned about and given more awareness to. So I'll hand it off to Deb. Hi, Deb.
Hi, sorry that I'm in a car. I'm on my way home from a slew of medical appointments today, but it's all good. And I did want to, before I even introduce myself or the topic of creating inclusive spaces, I wanted to first call out the concept of the inviting in versus calling out. I personally am a beneficiary of that. Having been to the hospital at least 8 times this past year, I've missed a lot of different meetings and so forth. And yet Dan and Christy have always reached out to make sure my opinion was included and heard, as well as to check in on my slew of medical challenges that I've had over the past few years. Highlight that concept of reaching out versus excluding, or I don't want to say removing somebody from a space, because that does actually tie into this concept of creating an inclusive environment. But before I discuss that, I did want to give a little bit about myself. I too have a background in higher education, working with special ed areas. I am a speaker as well as a writer, and I have actually been to law school. I was a few years short of my law degree before a medical challenge developed, and I am still hoping to find some place that will allow me to finish that degree. But again, that concept of inclusion is something that I have grown up with as a person with multiple invisible and visible disabilities, and having become my first injury at age 13. So I grew up with these disabilities, and as they progress, I've had to navigate everything from clerkships and internships to creating my own business and finding those places of integration. And in that process, I've really developed a great deal of knowledge of not just visible disabilities, but invisible disabilities. And more importantly, the value of creating an open and inclusive space. Some people may be listening and wondering, what is the value of working with an organization that specifically focuses on inclusive workspace? And I have to say that we have a unique experience. We have a lived experience. Many of us are living through with our own disabilities or caring for people with disabilities. And I will say it is a very different experience when you walk that path than when you hear about it. In my case, I've worked with people from visual impairments to hearing challenges to mobility challenges to chronic illnesses to, as in my case, my sons like to say, my second home is the hospital, to learning how to navigate these spaces. But I'll also say, as we've created these spaces of inclusion, because there is a significant population in the United States and worldwide of people that are disabled, that are not able to access jobs, that so want to have a job and give back to the community. So that alone is a reason for inclusion. But also think about this. How many of you are using voice recognition software now? How many of you use Siri now? How many of you have your screens read to or use Audible or other audio services? These didn't start out as mainstream projects. And by the way, I am also a techie. These started out as programs that were designed to help people with disabilities. And yes, for those that know what Dragon Dictate is, I started using Dragon Dictate in 1993 when it was nothing of what it was today. But yet, these tools that were created for disabled people are now often being used by mainstream population in main places, creating those exclusive spaces. You may wonder why I'm mentioning this. And the answer is because often people think of an inclusion space is specifically for somebody with a disability. But reality is, it actually can benefit the entire community. First of all, it represents inclusion. And if you take a moment and you look at listings for businesses, you'll see often listed organizations are serving minority communities or veterans or things such as that nature. Rarely is a disabled-owned business as a listing, as an option, nonetheless listed. But more importantly, how many times are we creating these spaces that are generally inclusive and representing creating a global inclusion space for people of all abilities and giving us that value rather than that fear of exposure? And I say fear of exposure because as one with, like I said, many invisible disabilities that I've often not disclosed, I run into people all the time who don't disclose it for fear of losing their job. But if you work with organizations such as Pieces of Me Foundation, that is all about creating that inclusive space, that welcoming space, we can help you create an environment that allows people of all abilities to thrive. And quite frankly, and I throw this back even to my job as a scout leader, when we create that inclusive spaces, everybody grows from that community. And I'll even bring it back to when my older son was, probably second or third grade in Cub Scouts. You know, we had a young man who was high functioning with Down syndrome. And when he wasn't able to come to meetings anymore, my older son said, I miss him here because we learned so much when he was present. That is what is the value of including us in all communities. We all learn and grow together. And quite frankly, there's no better group to do it than this group here at Pieces of Me Foundation, where we all have such a great understanding and knowledge of a variety of disabilities, of ways to implement, of opportunities and jobs where we've worked in these spaces. We know best a lot of these elements. And then where we don't know it, we also know where to reach out to our local communities that can help us grow that knowledge. And with that, I just want to say thank you, and I yield the mic.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Deb. And I couldn't agree more with the sentiment that you've put across in that, accessibilities and these things that we do to include others help everyone. When my family and I moved here in 1999 and English was our second language, having closed captioning, having subtitles on movies helped us be included in the entertainment that we were experiencing. And we forget that the things that we think are just going to help one person end up affecting, the only woman in the room, the person who's from another country. And it's just endless how far that list can go. But that's just such a wonderful point to bring up. I want to bring up our next speaker, who is
Kush, if I
also-
may, this is Jim. Can I interrupt just
Sure.
one moment? I'm sorry, because I just finally got the vision statement up. I wanted
Absolutely.
to do justice to the organization, if I can just briefly read it.
Sure,
For
please.
the transcript. Thank you very much. My apologies for the delay. It says, transforming society's understanding of disabilities, differences, and chronic illnesses so that all individuals have the opportunity to reach their full potential. Thank you very much. I appreciate that diversion.
Thank you, James. That was really wonderful to hear in its full glory. I would like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Elizabeth Spangola. And not only is she very much an expert in accessibility herself, but she is also really awesome on our tech team, and she has been responsible for leveling up our website. So I'm going to invite Elizabeth to speak to all of the awesome things that she's been doing to help us and really elevate the brand of Pieces of Me Foundation.
Thank you so much for that, Kush. I am unmuted. Thank you so much for that. I am pleased to actually be a part of this organization. So I received my master's and my PhD, both from Virginia Tech. My master's was in very technical. It was a statistics master's in data analytics. And I got my PhD in engineering education, focusing on accessibility engineering. So really looking in and diving down into the technical aspects of software development and seeing what makes software accessible and how can we push the needle on that. So that's a little bit of my background. For the Pieces of Me organization, I actually am the director of technology here, and I try to give a little bit of guidance as to some of what we can do for some of our technology aspects, whether that is the website or helping with different assistive technologies. And going further, I as my day job, I am a data engineer for IBM, and I work with the federal government as an accessibility specialist.
Thank you, Liz. All right. Next, I'd like to invite Dr. Ariel Silverman, who is our treasurer, and she'll be speaking to how inclusion means meeting people where they are. And I'll let her introduce herself. Hi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ariel Silverman. I'm the new treasurer for Pieces of Me. It's great to be here. A little bit about my background. I live in Alexandria, Virginia. I am totally blind since birth, and I work as the director of research at the American Foundation for the Blind. Prior to that, I worked as an independent consultant doing a combination of contract research for disability organizations and doing inclusion-related trainings I have a doctorate in social psychology from the University of Colorado at Boulder, so that has shaped a lot of my perspectives on many of these issues, in addition to being, of course, a person with a physical, visible sensory disability. So when we think about including people by meeting them where they are, I think there's a couple of levels to that. I think we've all kind of recognized the fact that, like it or not, there is a lot of politics in the disability world. People with particular disabilities tend to put the interests of their group, their own disability group, sometimes above the interests of people with different types of disabilities. And I'm certainly not immune to that tendency when I think about my childhood growing up and considering myself, prizing myself on my intellectual ability. For example, I tended to compare myself favorably to people who had intellectual and learning disabilities, and I thought that they had nothing in common with me. I was just blind, but at least, intellectually I wasn't disabled. And I realized now that that was a really problematic way of thinking, especially because I didn't really like it when people who were sighted with other types of disabilities looked down on me as a blind person. But we do have the innate tendency as human beings to compare ourselves favorably to members of other groups or people who we see as being different. Of course, there's also kind of tensions between disability groups when there are limited resources. So, for example, people in the blind community historically have advocated for higher earnings limits for blind people than for people with other types of disabilities, even though there's no real basis for that. And so that ends up creating competition over resources between people who are blind and people with other types of disabilities. So I'm really pleased to be involved with Pieces of Me because of the cross disability focus. And, I'm glad to say that in the last few years, I have really tried to prioritize learning about different types of disabilities that I haven't personally experienced in order to be a better ally and a better advocate and look at what the cross-cutting issues are affecting those of us with all types of disabilities. So I would challenge everyone who's involved in disability advocacy to think about how you can be more inclusive, not only advocating for inclusion of your own disability subgroup, but how can you include people with other types of experiences in your group's advocacy? Because there might be people with your type of disability who also happen to have other multiple disabilities and other types of identities, and we don't want to be projecting the idea that there's only one right way to be disabled or to have a particular type of identity. And the other aspect of taking people where they are, which I think is what Dan was thinking about when he asked me to speak about this, is that, of course, there is a lot of politics in the disability world. And even amongst people with the same type of disability, there can be conflict and competition between groups who, each believe that their way is best. And we also see in advocacy work that sometimes there's a tendency to vilify non-disabled people as being the enemy. People who engage in discriminatory actions, who create inaccessible spaces or inaccessible information or whatever. We can take on this attitude of, we got to crush them, we got to destroy them, they're the enemy. And from a social psychological lens, we are more effective as advocates if we can understand and validate the concerns of the parties that we are trying to work with. So when we think about why people without disabilities may exclude or discriminate against us, and that's not to say that their behavior is right or acceptable, but if we can really talk to people and find out why they are behaving the way they are, then we can be more effective at finding solutions that are durable. So there are ways to advocate and solve problems that are kind of unilateral, like, legal action, for example. You sue them and you win, and then you get all this money and you get a settlement or, some kind of victory. And those kinds of actions can create short-term change, but they often don't create durable change. And when you think about the ADA has been out for close to 35 years, and things are definitely not to the level that they should be in terms of inclusion. So the ADA is not a panacea for what's been happening, and the discrimination that we continue to face. So legislation and kind of force and strong arming is not enough to solve these problems. We really need to be having dialogues. We need to understand the concerns of the other party, and we need to find solutions that both parties can find acceptable, whether that is a business is discriminating or they're creating an inaccessible platform because they're ignorant and they don't know how to create an accessible platform, or they don't have the resources, or they think they don't have the resources, but in fact there's actually a very inexpensive way that they could create accessibility, and maybe they just need to be educated. Someone might discriminate because they're afraid of some kind of a liability or safety issue, and they might need education. They might need some kind of a collaborative solution to be developed. So I think it's really important that we keep in mind the fact that we are working with human beings, and we are fallible, and people on the other side of issues are also fallible, and they're also human beings with valid concerns. And in conclusion, I'm really glad to see that Dan and the others at Pieces of Me seem to be aligned with this way of thinking and understand this idea of calling people in rather than calling them out. I think is a great way to put that. And that we all get more accomplished when we work together rather than working against each other. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ariel. I just wanted to say you said so many amazing and really, really important things to this conversation. And I really appreciate you sharing that. 3 things that came to mind is, this idea of pride and prejudice. They're both 2 sides of the same coin, right? When it's great to have pride for your identity, but on the other side of that, there's always this side of prejudice, and we always have to be careful of that. And then 2, really trying to figure out someone else's perspective and not assuming that they're actually willfully trying to exclude people is also such a really important concept. In our organization, we actually call it compassionate curiosity, which is all about having compassion for the other person's experience and getting curious and asking those questions so that we can really be more inclusive. So thank you so much, Ariel. And I did see Deb's hand up, so I wanted to invite Deb back up to share some perspectives on this that she'd like to share.
I just really wanted to congratulate what Dr. Silverman was saying. All of us are fallible, right? We all make mistakes. We all misinterpret things. I often teach people when I talk about neurodivergencies, our brains are computers. We take inputs. It's going to process. Being aware of where those prejudices are is helpful. But that element of communication, and I heard Dr. Silverman mentioning this, of that communication element. And what came up for me is recently, my service doggy, he's all cuddled up next to me. We had a moment of an issue, and for 14 days in the hospital, everybody was phenomenal. The last day, I was refused medical services because somebody was afraid of dogs, even though my dog had been absolutely perfect that 14 days. My response wasn't, and I hesitated on making a complaint, right? Because I didn't want to create strife in a situation that my doggy has a following. He literally has a following of people. But that communication rather than litigious response. And yes, I know many of us here have been to law school, but often that communication is all that it can make the change, right? And in this particular case, I asked for not for an action against this particular person, but an in-service in that training. And as Dr. Silverman had pointed out, not only are we all fallible, sometimes it's an inexpensive teaching and a service where we can have this discussion of what it is like to be in these different spaces. And I also really wanted to celebrate that concept that it is easy for us to, even the disability community, place one over another or one lesser than another. And it's often hard to understand the experiences that another person has. And I think this is something Dan and I have talked about too. I'm not visually impaired. I do have some visual challenges now, but blindfolding yourself or putting yourself in a wheelchair, putting yourself with that overstimulation to see what that response is, gives us a sliver of what it's like to be in somebody's shoes. Absolutely. But that compassion for other people and understanding, we all have bad days. We all have moments. Not one person wants to represent all disabled people. Not one person's challenge is more important than another's. What is important is listening, hearing, and finding that way to uplift one another so we all can live to our fullest potential. So I just want to say thank you.
Absolutely. And I also do want to add, Deb, to the point that you just made. It is very easy to be in that situation and just feel like the world is against you. And as a neurodivergent person myself, there were many times where I just felt like things were so unfair and I wanted to, completely uproot the system. And that's not really the right way to go about it. And I recognize now, after having gone through that experience and struggling a whole lot, I should add, is what really allows me to be able to work with neurodivergent job seekers now and really help them gain those skills to be able to advocate for themselves, to be able to say, this is how I work best. This is how I prefer to be communicated to. This is, I would like to be called on meetings because these are the ways that I can show up as my best self in the workplace. So I'm just going to quickly squeeze an introduction in for myself over here. My name is Khushbu Chhabria. I'm recognizing now that I didn't introduce myself earlier. I'm also a board member here at Pieces of Me Foundation. And in my day job, I actually work as a program manager at Neurodiversity Pathways. And we're a small nonprofit program that works on educating organizations on how to be more supportive and inclusive of neurodivergent individuals. And on the other side, we help neurodivergent and job seekers with learning the skills in order to really get on their career path and find jobs where they can feel supported and empowered as well. I'm also actually currently writing Neurodiversity for Dummies. So I did want to do a quick announcement on that. And the book will be released in March of next year. So please do look out for that. I do believe it's available for pre-order. And so that's a little bit about me. I would actually, speaking of inclusion, next like to introduce Sherry James, who's going to be doing some brief remarks, and she is also going to be doing our concluding remarks to introduce Daniel at the end. I did want to say with Sherry, she's actually on our advisory council. And she is a founder, a chief experience officer of Phoenix Speaks, Inc., and the not-for-profit 2020 Lives Changed, Inc. Sherry is a keynote speaker. She's a trusted advisor, a training consultant who focuses on saving lives that may have been lost to suicide or mental health. Her new YouTube show is called The Creating Mental Wealth Show with Sherry James, speaks with professionals who work using multiple modalities, and want to introduce Sherry on the stage so she can speak to herself as well as do our concluding remarks. Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you, Khushbu. Well, thank you so much for allowing me to be here. I'm excited to be a part of this amazing organization. I don't really want to talk a lot about me, just know that Daniel and I have known each other now for a couple of years through a couple of organizations that we're both a member of. I've also spoken on a couple of panels with Daniel regarding kind of the intersectionality of diversity, right, when it comes to the seen and the unseen disabilities. So I struggle with both unseen and now seen, but I always want to make sure that any one program that I support takes into account the mental impact of kind of those inaccuracies that happen. I'm honored to call Mr. Hodges a friend of mine, and also one who will keep me in line with my own two organizations if ever I forget to include him in my conversations about making sure of accessibility. So, but let me tell you a little bit about this guy, Daniel, because I know you guys know him and you love him. Let me give you some little brief snippets about why I think he's an absolute rock star. So, some people get challenges, or someone dares us to do something, right? And, we decide, I don't know if they're just being whatever. I don't have time. Daniel, however, in 2017, right after a divorce and after a pretty serious leg and femur surgery, he was challenged to go to law school. Some friends of his said, you know what, I challenge you with all the things that you have going on. I'll bet you can't, right? I'm paraphrasing because I wasn't there. And so he didn't give up. A lot of us would have just after the surgery. I know I've been through a divorce. That takes a lot out of us. But even though both of those things notwithstanding, Daniel said, you know what, absolutely. In 2018, even though he had some concerns around his academic records and having chronic pain, he was accepted into the University of Baltimore and on a scholarship, which is amazing. It shows us what happens when we say that we can and then do. In 2019, after having experienced quite a few people kind of falling through the cracks, he asked his cousin Christy to help him start this organization. So back to not falling victim, not saying I can't, but not just saying that there is a problem, but coming together to try to find a solution for that problem just speaks volumes to his personality. In 2021, when he was finally accepted as a 501c3 organization, I can tell you that things went pretty quickly because he went about getting together his team, his board of directors, his mission statements, all the things that are necessary for a successful nonprofit to run. And not to say that it doesn't come with bumps, right? I sat on the board for several not-for-profits, and we all have pretty much the same challenges. But with the way that Daniel handles them is always above board, always with true transparency. And right now he gets the opportunity to present with, consult with medical providers, talk to businesses and other organizations about the topics of both accessibility and belonging. And for those who don't understand the difference, Dan is more than happy to explain that to you or any other organization. So he's gone ahead and been a guest lecturer for classes talking about disability history and rights. And health equity. And this organization, he's very adamant to make sure that we all know, and I don't, well, we already said the mission statement, so I don't have to say that again, but making sure that they're consulting with consensus building, crafting a unique win-win proposition, and striving to be a force for good while creating social change. So it is with that, I would like to introduce Mr. Daniel Hodges.
Well, thank you, Sherry, for that great introduction. And to the rest of the team, again, I can't say how much I appreciate you being here, doing this work with us. None of us has gotten paid. All of us have put in blood, sweat, and tears. And we do it because we realize we have this conviction that our work makes a difference, that it matters, and that it changes lives, transforms lives, perhaps even saves lives. And I think on that last one, we overlook how critical it is to feel that sense of belonging, to know that our wants, our needs, our experiences matter. And that's why we do the work that we do. We started this idea with a series of bold ideas. Christy and I knew that it was at least worth a shot for us to put together a team and create the kind of crowdsourced, self-determined, authentic resource list that would actually bring people closer to the things that would help them reach the next milestone in their lives. We knew that as we started talking about opportunity, that eventually it would take hold, this truth that everyone has something to give and everyone has something to learn. And for everyone who has either listened in tonight or participated or is seeing this on the recording, you're learning from and learning with a group of people who don't always agree on everything. we come from different backgrounds, we've had different experiences, and that is the beauty of creating something different and fresh and new. It is saying we can set aside our differences. We can ask instead, not where do we disagree, but where can we learn from one another, and how can we elevate that standard of understanding so that we can discover new insights, so that we can be more effective in creating opportunity, and again, so that we can start making solutions that are beneficial to everyone. When Jen read out the into that vision statement about all individuals being able to have the opportunity to reach their full potential, it's easy to assume based on conditioning that that means all individuals with disabilities, but we took it a step further. We understand that when each of us has a chance to succeed, all of us benefit. That means that rather than perpetuating the myth that accessibility comes at the cost of profitability, or that belonging comes at the cost of reducing standards, we are standing in the face of that and saying, no, there is ample evidence to say the opposite, that accessibility and belonging elevate the experience for all individuals, businesses, other organizations, regardless of whether or not someone with a disability is at the center of that experience, because the principles of universal design and the principles of creating win-win solutions hold true. The other bold idea I really want to drill down on is that as we examine the things we've been through, when we look at the hard work of meeting people where they are, which sounds great in theory, but difficult in practice, when we have to give grace to someone who reminds us of someone else who, through their own lack of knowledge or lack of understanding, created a setback, we benefit by extending that olive branch. We benefit by reversing that trauma and by changing the narrative so that people have the opportunity to learn instead of to fear. You know, when I was a young adult, I had a series of experiences happen that really set the course for where I am today. Within the course of a calendar year, I was at my dad's bedside when he passed away from an 8 years long battle with Agent Orange poisoning, having been unable to get most of the help he needed for most of the time he struggled. Shortly thereafter, so I was fighting to have a job transfer at a major retail store because although I had proven myself to be capable at one location, when I switched regions, somehow the word seemed to have gotten out that I was blind. And so people who had never been around someone who could figure out a way to stock shelves without relying completely on their vision, they didn't understand that there was an opportunity to be made there. Not too long after that, my oldest child was born, and while we were fighting to get her cancer treatment, we were also fighting to maintain custody, not because her mother or I had neglected her or abused her or even made any mistakes outside the norm, but simply because we had simply run into professionals who didn't understand that alternative techniques were a thing and just didn't have the experience or the training to think beyond their own skill sets. And, you know, one of the most tragic things about that is one of those individuals had been in our home, had sat in our living room, talked with us multiple occasions, good long conversations, and never expressed once a doubt about our parenting ability. We didn't know that those doubts existed until we saw her name on the referral list when we were dealing with CPS. And how I wish she would have simply said, I don't know how you're going to do this. Teach me, answer my questions, have this discussion with me. Because so oftentimes, as individuals with disabilities, we're judged not on our capabilities, but on the perceptions of our capabilities based on people who have simply seen the wrong media narratives or have seen the wrong depictions or have simply been taught there are things you don't ask about. And thus, ignorance and doubt and just misconceptions live on. So, when we talk about meeting people where they are, that means swallowing our own trauma sometimes. That means dealing with difficult, hard, sometimes really, unpleasant questions, because that's how learning and growth happens. That's how we are able to say, okay, now that I hear your question and I understand where you're coming from, let's learn together on how we can bridge this gap. And let's look for a way that I can show you or teach you how we do things. And let's also learn, if you're concerned about becoming accessible, if you're concerned about being an ally, what's going on there? What can I learn from you about your experience that I can then take and become a better advocate from? Because we're in this together and these benefits are universal. And at the end of the day, this work that we do, speaking personally, the times that I sat down and wrote out copy for our IRS application or for our website or communicated with my team via email where my hand could barely move. The times where I taught myself about nonprofit law and filling out the right forms by night, sometimes 3 or 4 in the morning while I was doing class during the day. Those times have been worth it, and I would do it all over again because I know that this work matters. I know that the people whom I've had the privilege to meet, to talk with, to learn with, not just from, not just teach, but learn with, they matter. And the people that they touch matter. And as we go about doing this one by one, being a force for good, rather than simply looking out for our own interests, it's going to catch on. It's going to make a difference, and it already is. So tonight, I'm asking anyone who's participating live or participating via recording at a later point, come be part of this. No matter what you're currently dealing with, no matter what you've been through, no matter how many times you've been told that you have nothing to offer, this invitation is for you because you do have something to offer, and our community is stronger with everyone taking their position within our community and helping us move this work forward. So whether that be your time, your talent, financial contributions, whatever it is that you feel like you can offer, add it to what we're doing. Let's go change lives together. Let's improve the status quo for everyone. And let's take the experiences that we have sometimes suffered through, sometimes lived through. Let's turn them through the process of alchemy, forgiveness, and learning into the catapult that helps us really change the status quo both through this year, next year, and well into the future. Thank you for joining us tonight. And again, to my team, you guys and gals are awesome. And I'm just so privileged to work with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a couple of minutes before everyone leaves. I did want to say, we did have a fundraiser, and we do have a link which you can use to donate. Since it's the giving season, I did want to put that out there. And additionally, you know, just kind of expounding on what it is that Dan has said here, we want you to be a part of this community. We want to hear from you. We want to know which issues are affecting you so we can provide you with the resources and the support and the access to information so that we can use this community to empower each other and to continue building this community where everyone can feel psychologically safe and included and met exactly where they are. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for watching. Piecesofme.org. Pieces of Me Foundation. In order of appearance: Khushbu Chabria, Board of Directors; Christy Rogers, Vice President and Co-founder; Dr. Karen Schultz, Board of Directors; James Troutwine, Secretary; Professor Fred Brown, Board of Directors; Deb Vick, Board of Directors; Dr. Elizabeth Spingola, Board of Directors; Dr. Ariel Silverman, Treasurer; Sherry James, PMP Advisory Council; Daniel Hodges, JD, President and Co-founder. Copyright Pieces of Me Foundation. All rights reserved 2023.